Today we're talking away about the one and only Alan Partridge. Yes, hello there. We're actually in the home of Steve Coogan himself, Manchester. Or are we? We're actually in Stockport, and I've been told that I can't say that's Manchester, but we'll talk about that in a minute. Greg Haynes with you, and this is going to be quite a different show today because it's not a simple interview. I'm part of the show. This could be the end of our careers, but I'm joined by my very own cousin, first of all. I'd like to bring him in. This is an incredible situation. Andrew Cairns. Knowing me, Gregory Haynes, knowing you, Andrew Cairns, aha. Aha. And knowing me, Gregory Haynes, knowing you, Phil Lennon, aha. Aha. And you are our other cousins, better half, aren't you?
Better's a strong term for it, yeah.
He's a half. Yeah,
could be quite controversial. Now, we're here today to talk about our favourite comedy character, aren't we? Mr. Alan Partridge. Phil, first of all, we're in your lovely office here in Stockport Town Centre, so it's not Manchester, is that correct?
Yeah, I think it's controversial. It's Greater Manchester. You know, it's the region of Manchester,
but not Manchester.
Not technically, no.
Right. Okay. So there could be some tears there.
Yeah. I mean, I'm from Liverpool, so you know that's even worse. Like, you know,
and we've got to ask him this, haven't we, Drake? By the way, if we say Drake, we're referring to Mandrake, Andrew Cairns himself. So other nicknames might be used later in the show. Your name's Lennon, Phil. You're from Liverpool. Now, surely, come on. How's Paul? How's Ringo?
I just feel that if I was related to John, I wouldn't be doing this podcast. I'd be on some yacht somewhere, you know, in the Mediterranean.
That's a bit disrespectful.
I'm just saying, like, you know.
That's a bit disrespectful. But anyway, we're here about talking about Partridge. Drake, we've watched it all our lives, haven't we?
Yeah, since we were young, haven't we?
But it feels, more than any other comedy character, like a real person, Alan.
I think it's a character... It's hard to think of another comedy character that gives and gives and gives and has done for how many years.
Yeah.
If you think of, like, I don't know, something like Only Fools and Horses, which would be a massive nation's favourite of a comedy character, someone like Del Boy, does it give you quite the one-liners that Partridge does from a comedy fan over and over again? And I think specifically with Partridge, can you apply it to everyday life? Like, probably all part of the Alan Partridge Facebook groups online and things. And,
which you are, of course.
How many times do we see something that's going on, be it something in the pandemic or just something in everyday life that gets compared to a Partridge line constantly? And I can't think of another sitcom character, as we've got many in this country, that is quite up there with Alan Partridge and just gives and gives and gives in that way.
And later on, we'll talk a bit about how he came into being. And there's a lot of people who were involved in the writing, aren't there, who a lot of people don't even know about. Some big names in there.
Well, obviously, someone out there would be able to fact check better than us. But as far as I'm aware, particularly in those early stages of Partridge, it was part of the Day to Day, which was previously On the Hour, the radio show. And that was Armando Iannucci's writing. And ghostwriting for a lot of Armando Iannucci's work was people like Stuart Lee, who's gone on to be considered one of the greatest comedians ever of all time, or officially the 41st best stand-up comedian of all time, which is a classic Stuart Lee joke if anyone wants to go and look at.
Was that one of those votes
yeah,
somewhere?
But he's arguably one of the greatest comedians that's ever been produced. And he was writing for that. And also people like Richard Herring, they were a team on that. I think one of the briefs I remember seeing an interview when they were writing on the hours, Armando Iannucci gave them a brief which they ignored completely, and Stuart Lee decided to write The New Adventures of the Birmingham Six, which is so this is the kind of level we're working at. But I think with Partridge, I remember an interview with Stuart Lee saying that Steve Coogan came into the office with this voice, and this whole character and a backstory instantly emerged around there. Just the genius of Coogan to come up with that voice, and then the character can emerge from that.
He is, because he's just like a real person, isn't it? Like we said before, Phil, I can't think of another comedy character, certainly in this country, who you could be forgiven for thinking is actually a real person.
No, I completely agree. And I think that what makes Partridge funny is that there's a little bit of Partridge in all of us.
Absolutely.
Like, you know, the insecurity and the doubt and the kind of that arrogance about, you know, about your own abilities. I think we've all got a bit of that. I think for me, you see Partridge, obviously you cringe, but then you think, well, actually, like, you know, that could be me or someone, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely, certainly at work we all quote it to get through any tension moments. Even my team have jokingly said, "Oh, he's gone full Partridge again." You know, so you know, it carries on into everyday life.
They do it with me at Eurosport as well, and sometimes even on air when we're doing things with the superbikes. It's like, that was so Partridge, Greg. Yeah, and I don't even think I'm the worst in that sense.
I even said to my boss the other day, I said, this is going to go so Alan Partridge if I'm not careful. But it's part of, whatever you do, I think it's part of just a good morale booster. It's a character that adds so much to our lives, isn't it? Hence why we're here now in this podcast.
Do you know another thing I really love about Partridge as well? He's so English, that's one thing, from a patriotic point of view. And the way he uses, random celebrity names and just drops them in, like Sue Cook, as we'll hear later, and some of the clips. And... using brand names as well. He laughed so much, he had Kenka coming out of his nostrils. He didn't just say he laughed and all the coffee came out of his nose. He had Kenko coming out of his nostrils. It's great, isn't it? Stuff like that. Well, let's have a listen then. Who is Partridge? For those of you listening who aren't quite so sure, I'm sure most of you are Partridge super fans like us. Here's a show, and it was Anglican Lives, and this is the character Ray Woolard, and obviously it's quite apparent as you start listening to this that Alan has written the script. So let's have a listen to, first of all, Alan's background and the impression Alan wants to give of himself.
This is Norfolk Nights with Alan Partridge.
Alan Gordon Partridge is the best and best-loved radio presenter in the region.
That was for anyone who's going through a trial separation or messy divorce. The Human League with the Don't You Want Me? 50% she got. It's weighted against the man.
He was born into a changing world of rationing, teddy boys, apes in space and the launch of ITV. But the Norwich of today is a very different place, although the market still remains.
Hello, I'm Alan Partridge.
Alan's broadcasting career began as chief DJ with Radio Smile at St Luke's.
Sorry, second-hand, but it's in quite good condition.
He makes a point of returning every February.
Has anyone never heard of me? No. Right, it's very rude to say
After
that.
replacing Peter Flint as the presenter of Scout About, he entered the top 8 of BBC Sports presenters.
Bang! And join me, Alan Partridge, for the big race at Marple, the horse race.
But Alan's big break came with a primetime BBC chat show.
Aha!
Sadly, Knowing Me, Knowing You battled against poor scheduling, having been put up against News at 10, then in its heyday. Due to declining ratings, a single catastrophic hitch, and the dumbing down of network TV, Alan's show was cancelled. Not to be dissuaded, he embraced this opportunity to wind up his production company, leave London, and fulfil a lifelong ambition. He returned to his roots in local radio.
Call of the night. OK, the lines are buzzing for tonight's hot topic. Who is your favourite rough-voiced singer? Rod Stewart and Chris Rea, big votes for them, but they've been massacred by a late surge from rasping taffy Bonnie Tyler. Wonder how many she smokes.
Roots that first sprouted in a field in East Anglia.
That was my watch. Well, just lost my blooming watch. Actually, keep that bit in. It's nice. I think it gives it a human touch. Nice.
Now single, Alan is an intensely private man and a keen businessman.
300k, I would take it to Sky.
He's always on the lookout for new investment opportunities.
Right, there we go. That was back in 2002, I think, when that went out, around the time of Series 2. What do we make of it then? That's obviously the impression Alan wants to give to the world there. Yeah. Knowing Me, Knowing You, Mandrake, it was taken off the air due to poor scheduling and the clash with News at 10, which was then in its heyday.
What to say, the dumbing down of network TV. That's the line that really gets nothing to do with Alan shooting a person live on air. It was the dumbing down of network TV.
Of course, in Knowing Me, Knowing You as well, Phil, he actually did punch a disabled man in the face, and his own boss, so that probably didn't
twice,
do
didn't he punch Tony Hayers twice in the face?
Did he?
Yeah,
I yes, he did, because he got up and he did it with the turkey on his fist, yeah. So it probably didn't do him any favours, did it, to be fair?
No, I don't think so. And you know, what's great about Alan is that it's never his fault.
No,
true. It's literally every other person's fault apart from him.
Yeah. That's true, actually. And how many times have we seen Alan as well? We were talking about this, weren't we, Andrew, when we were coming up to Stockport, Manchester, Phil? Yeah, every time the joke's on him, he gets quite angry, doesn't he, and almost aggressive.
Well, I think touching on that thing Phil mentioned earlier about there's all a bit of Partridge in us, I think we all know someone who's a bit like an Alan Partridge as well, a bit like you were saying, someone who doesn't like the joke being on them, says something daft. So Partridge kind of represents that other character, someone that we all probably know as well as ourselves.
Yeah, and it is like you said it earlier, Phil, as well, the desperation of wanting to be popular, and there's so many people like that, actually. And in a comedy thing, it's funny. But imagine working, 24/7 with a Partridge. You'd go mad, wouldn't you?
I think that, there's just... I think what's fascinating about Partridge is that, for example, there's the Twitter account, Accidental Partridge, and, I've subscribed to that for a long time, and, there's just so many examples of Partridge in the real world, and I just think Partridge is eternal. I think that's why it's so successful as a comedy show. Like, we've mentioned this before, that... with Partridge, I think with I'm Alan Partridge, I think the first time you watch it, I think you chuckle, but I don't think it's actually that funny. I think the more you watch it, the funnier Partridge gets, because I think you relate to it more. I remember you mentioned that it's the subtleties.
It's the subtleties of the comedy writing, isn't it? You can watch it once, and yes, there are a lot of one-liners, but they're not like hand on the microphone style. Here's the punchline. You can go back and watch it and pick something up different each time, which I think we all do. Hence why we're here again, talking about this. But it's those little subtleties, like you were saying, the product placement, the very British nature of it. The little, even just Alan's faces that you might miss first time, and then you suddenly see him pull a face. It's those little things that we miss, isn't it, that you go back and watch.
Do you guys have a favourite version of Alan? Because he's changed a lot, hasn't he, over the years? He started with On the Hour, as you said, Andrew, before, with the radio show, which then obviously became The Day Today, which was fantastic, by the way, for anyone who's never seen that. I'm Alan Partridge. Sorry, Knowing Me, Knowing You. Then I'm Alan Partridge. That was the heyday, I'd say, wasn't it? The I'm Alan Partridge. But then again, there's been a load of new stuff in the last 5-10 years.
I think Partridge, he's had a bit of a renaissance, hasn't he? He seems to be back in again.
Because I think he'd sort of finished with him, hadn't he? Around sort of after I'm Alan Partridge. That was you wouldn't have imagined he was going to have another 25 years of life and more. And the film as well.
Yeah, I think that's it. I think, the things after... I mean, I'm Alan Partridge is obviously the kind of the most recognised version.
I think so, yeah.
I think it is.
But I think, some of the new stuff like this time, with Alan Partridge, I think is clever. It's almost like a Knowing Me, almost version 2, so to speak.
Well, even Alpha Papa, isn't it? The film is a polished version of Alan, deliberately, obviously, I think, deliberately the way he's done it. But it absolutely is that kind of... It just has come back, hasn't it? Definitely as a renaissance.
Do you think it's as funny as the old stuff, or are we looking at it with rose-tinted spectacles?
I suppose you'd have to ask a new audience who is neutral. I would personally say that I'm Alan Partridge series 1 and 2, for the sake of this argument right now, are probably up there, then followed by...
I'd agree.
But we're in the danger here of going into what is the best Partridge, are we? In this territory, very dangerous. I'd have to say the best of Alan Partridge. Very dangerously in that territory. But I think probably... the most we hear about, particularly of our age group and a bit older who watch Alan, probably is I'm Alan Partridge series 1 and 2, I would guess.
Although I do also think the new stuff, the podcast, the Oast House podcast, and this time is Mid Morning Matters, which I think it was around 2009, 2010, wasn't it, when that started? 2010, I think it was. Is probably still a lot funnier than a lot of the other very PC comedy that's around these days.
Yeah, I think absolutely so, yeah.
Let's have a listen to this. This is a clip from 2002. Michael Parkinson chatting with the one and only Steve Coogan about how the character came to being Alan Partridge. Let's have a listen. Does he compare him to anyone in the real world?
How did he start off?
He was a sports commentator. I knew nothing about sport, and I still know very little. So I just make things. I just make things up. Like if I was watching, they'd give me some footage of a football match. And I wouldn't know who was playing or who they were, and I'd just start talking rubbish, actually, saying things like, there goes the man with the ball, passing it to the other man, the one with the curly hair, and he's kicked it in the net, and that's a goal. And you just talk. It's verbal diarrhea, but, there are a lot of broadcasters... present company accepted, who do talk a lot of verbal diarrhea, but they say it with such confidence that they kind of get away with it. I think the attitude is keep talking, doesn't matter what you're saying.
Yeah. But talking about present company accepted, I mean, how did he become a talk show host? And dare I ask this question, who was he modelled on?
Well...
Now, you tell the truth. If you tell the truth, you've got 1 minute left. If you don't tell the truth,
well, the thing is, he was sort of an amalgam of lots of people, funnily enough, since I started doing him, it's more after the event, watching broadcasters, that I started to think, God, he's just like he's worse than Alan Partridge. I mean,
Go on.
Well, there's a little bit of Richard Madeley, I think.
Is there? A little. Which bit of Richard Madeley?
The bits where Richard Madeley sort of puts his foot in it, which is most of him, I think.
Madeley is like that, isn't he?
Yeah, very much so.
If you look at some of the clips on YouTube, Richard Madeley is Alan Partridge. Like Coogan just said, he's more Partridge than Partridge.
It's frightening, isn't it, how much it is, yeah.
Like, I remember seeing Richard and Judy once. He said, I've left my car outside, it's just started raining. Can someone go and put the roof on my car? Just like Partridge says, it's parked outside Abbey National. Okay, so that was Partridge there then. And it started as a sports reporter, didn't it, on the day-to-day, well, on the hour.
On the hour first, then, which became the day-to-day once it moved to TV.
On the TV. That was fantastic, wasn't it, some of the stuff on there?
I still think the Day-to-Day is probably one of the greatest comedies of all time. If nobody's watched that one series.
It seems to be, obviously, we've seen it, but it doesn't seem like it's that well known.
Well, I think Brass Eye is probably more famous, which when it moved, Chris Morris and co moved to Channel 4.
Yeah.
It is almost seen as like the Day-to-Day series too, but isn't really.
Yeah.
If no one's seen it, that's more Panorama, whereas the Day-to-Day is more the news at 10. But it is very much how the news is, isn't it? The news is very much a pantomime, particularly now.
Absolutely,
in the last couple of years with the music. The over-dramatic music.
And all the graphics that went on. And it just goes on and on.
They deliberately extended it and extended it, didn't they?
Yeah.
So, it's a wonderful show. Just anyway, so I think if anyone hasn't seen it, it's absolutely worth
seeing.
it.
If you think, Drake, how ahead of its time that was, bearing in mind that was 1994, and you watch Sky News now, and it's all like that, live graphics and all these things coming in. It takes about 10 minutes for the show to start.
Yeah, absolutely. And the over-the-top personalities like presenters or newsreaders trying to make a name for themselves on the back of somebody else's story, isn't it really? But it's very much strange how life imitates art.
It just seems like, I don't know, do people try too hard in real life in general?
I mean, this is the thing. Alan Partridge is the definition of trying too hard.
Yeah.
Everything he does is trying too hard.
And trying to be popular and wanting a second series and all the rest of it. Well, we have got a few clips we can play in when it does tend to go wrong, and we've all chosen a few selections, haven't we? Here's a good example. This is series 1 of I'm Alan Partridge, and he made some remarks about farmers. I can't remember the exact line now, Drake. You might remember about the infected spinal column in a bat. He was talking about farmers, wasn't he, and some of the bad produce they...
He'd somehow managed to alienate the whole of the farming community, hadn't he? For no apparent reason at all, other than he decided to, wasn't it, really?
Well, let's have a listen. This is an interview with Peter Baxendale Thomas, who's played by Chris Morris. And normally, of course, we can see this on screen with Series 1, but let's have a listen as to what it would have actually sounded like on the radio.
Joining me, Alan Partridge, and Peter Baxendale Thomas of the Norfolk Farmers Union. Now, yesterday, I sort of trod in a rather large farmer's pat when I made some comments about intensive farming. Where did I go wrong?
I think your comments were ill-founded. They were deeply ignorant. They showed a complete lack of understanding of modern agricultural methods and simply served to highlight the sort of intense stupidity that farmers encounter from armchair pundits who forget to think before they open their mouth. But with a full and frank apology that you're about to give us this morning, I'm sure you can dig yourself out of this rather ugly hole.
Yeah. Sorry. Have you got any requests? Anyone you want to say hello to? Or
Look, I'm just trying to say that when you make ignorant comments like you did the other day, you serve simply to alarm the public and to inflame the farmers, which is exactly what you've done. Why don't you just apologise and make it nice and
Thought that'd fool you. You could talk the hind legs off a donkey. But your donkeys are probably born without hind legs because of all the chemicals you put in their chips.
Alan, I don't have donkeys, and even if I did, I wouldn't feed them chips. This is exactly the sort of rubbish you came up with the other day when you talked about putting a spine in a bap.
I admit that was a mistake. I shouldn't have said bap.
Well, good. Well, that's a start.
Well, no, I should have said baguette. Because a spinal column would fit in a baguette.
Listen, you've upset half the farmers in this community. You seem to alienate everybody you come across, including, I gather, your wife, which is why you end up living like some bloody tramp in a lay-by.
It's a travel tavern.
I don't care what you call your sordid little grief hole. It makes no difference to me. The fact is that an awful lot of my colleagues...
Yeah, farmyard animals. Yeah.
You're talking about my friends.
Yeah, I've probably got more friends than you've got cows.
This is ridiculous.
How many cows have you got?
I've got 100 cattle.
Yeah, I've got 104 friends.
I don't see what this is going to gain you. Why don't you just issue a frank and full retraction of what you said, and you get yourself out of a lot of silly bother?
Yeah, you are a big posh sod with plums in your mouth.
I don't think it's got anything to do with class.
And the plums have mutated and they've got beaks.
Beaks?
Yes, beaks.
Have you got any more of this, or do you want to stop at quacking plums?
No. You make pigs smoke.
I want to know where you think you earn the right to go swanning off on these ludicrous
swans. You feed beef burgers to swans.
Do I?
Yes, you do.
All right, well, perhaps you can tell me what's wrong with feeding beef burgers to swans.
Oh, what?
Well, if you fill a swan's stomach up with beef burgers, it's full of fat, it'll float better. That's why we do it.
Really?
No, you complete cretin. I'm just contributing to this total farce. What else are you going to accuse me of?
I'll tell you what.
What?
You farmers, you don't like outsiders, do you? Like to stick to your own?
What do you mean by that?
I've seen the big-eared boys on farms.
For goodness sake, resort to...
If you see a lovely field with a family having a picnic, and there's a nice pond in it, you fill in the pond with concrete, you plough the family into the field, you blow up the tree and use the leaves to make a dress for your wife, who's also your brother.
Right.
I think there's the classic with Alan there. He knows he's done wrong, but still bludgeons through, doesn't he? He must know on some level, but he can't stop showing face. He has to carry on, doesn't he?
Because I don't think he's a bad person, is he, at heart? In fact, I think he's probably a good guy, really. But why then? Is it a desperation? Is it a want of being popular, or...?
I think, he just doubles down, as you say. Like, I think, Partridge can't back down in any way. Yeah. And it just gets more and more outrageous. And I think what's great about Partridge is that, he doesn't do any research, does he? And it's just,
he doesn't,
it's just him. It's just him and his opinions just bangs them out. And it's incredible. And it just, there's so much, longevity to Partridge.
Because there's nothing wrong with admitting you've got it wrong sometimes, is there? You learn more from your mistakes. But it seems like there's a lot of people, and this is what's clever about it. He's obviously using it as a way to highlight this in real life, isn't he? That there are people out there who can't admit their mistakes.
Yeah. Well, I think all good comedy has a basis in truth, doesn't it? I think that's the nature of it. It has to be relatable. It has to be slightly self-deprecating, doesn't it? So I think the fact that Alan makes it worse for himself, thank God it has been that. Otherwise, we wouldn't have quite the comedy show we have, would we?
But is it true that we would actually agree with a fair amount of what he says initially? For example, you're a big posh sod, even though you wouldn't say that on the radio. It's true, isn't it, what he's saying? But he's obviously being very rude in the process.
Yeah, I mean, he has no inner monologue, does he?
No.
He just says what he thinks. And I think that, maybe part of the reason why Partridge is popular is because, we have to be restrained in our, personal and professional lives, understandably. And obviously Partridge has no inner monologue and just says what he thinks. And, maybe there's a bit of that in everyone where it's like, oh, I wish I could kind of say what I think a bit more.
Yeah, I think there's a bit of catharsis in not having a filter, isn't there? Where someone can get away with saying more that any of us really can, probably, in our lives, isn't it?
I think as a slight aside, what's amazing about Partridge, if you think about it, all of the seasons and all the shows of Partridge are the guest characters, as you've mentioned before. Obviously Chris Morris there doing that bit. Obviously, like Simon Pegg, for example.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Like, big names in the writing and obviously in front of the camera as well. You've got obviously like the Father Ted writers, they're in it as well.
Absolutely.
And many others. And it's great. Like that 90s almost kind of BBC comedy, the talent in that era is incredible.
I think that's what's led to its longevity, ultimately, is the amount of people that were associated either as ghostwriters or in the background or a bit part. That's what's led to it being so good, because of the pool of talent that was working on either the early material or into I'm Alan Partridge itself.
Felicity Montague's fantastic as Lynn, isn't she? Because she's much younger in real life than Lynn is.
Yeah,
certainly back then in 97 and 2002 when the two seasons were recorded. But she just puts up... I mean, you can tell she loves Alan Reeder, doesn't she? She should probably be Alan's wife, really. And a lot of people think they are. And whether she'd be able to cope with that, I'm not sure. But she genuinely does have a fondness for Alan. She cares about him.
Do you reckon Alan has a fondness for her?
Good question.
He would joke there's quote-unquote no affection.
I think he would.
But...
And we see this in the film, don't you, at the end? Because they have a big argument, remember, in the film, and they end up making up. But even then, he can't really apologise properly. Can he? Like in that farmer's rant we just heard. Sorry. And in knowing me, knowing you, he had a big argument there, remember? He said, I'm Alan Partridge, I'm very sorry.
Have you seen Knowing Me, Knowing You?
Not for a long time.
So if anyone hasn't, it's... I believe, again, anyone can fact check it, I believe it was a Christmas special.
It was.
The radio show of Knowing Me, Knowing You. So before the TV show, when it was on the radio.
Yeah.
And it was a Christmas special over the festive period. And it kind of segues, I think, into what I'm Alan Partridge will later be, because it follows Alan around like a radio fly-on-the-wall documentary, doesn't it, Greg?
Yeah.
And it's fantastic. So there's more like sort of fake versions of the production crew, and like those bit pot characters. I think Armando Iannucci plays a character, doesn't he? Probably something Santini or something like that, isn't it?
Yeah, is it Mario Santini? Something like that.
But it follows like Alan's disaster on one of the shows, doesn't it? But it follows the general disaster surrounding Alan, doesn't it? So I think when he first walks in, they're all talking about. I think it follows the Vegas episode where Alan has accidentally gambled away his car, and then in trying to win back
his wife's car.
Yeah, in trying to win back his car, he's gambled away his wife's car, and the production companies had to bail Alan out. And so I think they're discussing the mess around that and why then the production budget is reduced because they've had to bail out Alan and his wife's car.
And you can tell the whole crew are against him, aren't they?
Yeah,
they want the show to do well, but no one likes working with Alan doing it because it's rude to everybody.
There's that line when you even hear Alan before he arrives, the banging of the door and the chuckling.
Exactly.
And I think he's singing as he comes in as well, isn't he?
Yeah.
And even the first line he says to them is, "You're all looking rather conspiratorial, isn't it?"
And then mutiny.
Yeah, it's a mutiny. And then walks off to say he's going to pick up a penguin, isn't it, on the way out, rather than actually chatting to the colleagues and finding out what's going on.
Yeah.
But there's earlier jokes in there as well, isn't there? Things like what will later go on to Sue Cook's Pulled Out. There's an earlier joke with John Goodman, isn't there? Where John Goodman is they've clinched this fantastic deal to get John Goodman onto the radio show of Knowing Me, Knowing You. And while the Armando Iannucci character is out working on, isn't it 15 to 1? He's working on another classic British reference.
Yeah, so the producer was out working on 15 to 1.
Alan snatches the phone, I believe, out of one of the production crew's hand who's negotiating the John Goodman deal.
Having been told not to talk with the guests.
Yeah, having been specifically told, and tries to renegotiate the deal. And instead of putting him up in Claridge's, Alan decides he wants him to stay in the Holiday Inn, which is John Goodman, even a Hollywood star at this point. And then the whole thing breaks down, doesn't it? Until the fact they lose John Goodman and he's not on the show, don't they?
And of course they end up with there's Bill Pickley.
They try to get Bill Pickley, who they then have to drop.
They'd have to drop.
It's a fantastic phone call with Bill Pickley, isn't it? Which is still, if no one has heard it, it's up there as one of the best parts.
It's a wave.
It's a wave.
Yeah, you've got to hear it. It's on like it's knowing me, knowing you. I think it's one of the best Partridge works.
It is, and I think it's really unknown as well. Really unknown. It's really, really good.
Because it's radio as well, you picture it. Because you were saying this, weren't you, Phil? We were just chatting while we were listening to Alan Partridge there with Peter Baxendale Thomas. And you were saying it's actually funnier not being able to see it. Yeah. Because it's almost as though it would be. I mean, imagine listening to that on the radio.
Yeah, you're just driving in your car or it's just on in the background.
There's also an insight into how Alan treats people. Do you remember his writer? I can't remember the writer's name in it, but the writer's staying at Alan's house and Alan's showing off about his collection of samurai
I think his name was Pat.
Yes, it was Pat, yeah.
Which again comes back to that
word. Pat a lot, actually, doesn't he?
Pat is used later as well.
And Alan's going on about his samurai swords over the fireplace. We'd rather have a picture of the family. And this poor writer stays up all night writing this script for Alan.
And Alan's drunk by this point.
Yeah, Alan's been drinking.
Has an argument with Carol.
Yeah, doesn't Carol knock a load of stuff over in the kitchen or fall over?
It's the only time we ever hear from Carol, isn't it? His wife.
You hear a knock on like a load of tins clanging in the background. And
Carol, are you right?
Yeah. In the background, he doesn't bother to go and check. He goes, "Yeah, she's all right."
Pat say, "Alan, are you sure she's right?" It sounds like she's fallen over. Yeah, she's fine.
So Alan goes upstairs. What was all that about? And then you can hear all this going on. And this poor writer, Pat's been up all night writing the script, only for about to go on air. Alan goes, "Yeah, I don't think we're going to use that." Doesn't he? I think that's just a classic insight into Alan. He's happy for someone else to do all the work, only the last minute to not care at all.
And that is the thing. There's no I in team, is there? And at the end of the day, you know, he lets people do all the work for him, but he wants to be the star of the show. Well, obviously, there was Knowing Me, Knowing You, radio show, as you said. Then the TV show ends up shooting Forbes McAllister live on air, which probably wasn't the best thing he could have done. And then we've got...
Be careful with that.
I love the bagpipes. And then, of course, we've got the series themselves. I'm Alan Partridge. I love those random quotes at the end. Should we have another one, actually?
How can you set fire to your hands?
They're like just random interviews he must be doing in the background. But he gets himself into some real scrapes, doesn't he, here? And you talked before, if we just go back to Series 1, that was the music from Series 2. But just sum it up for us, Drake. He had he had an event scheduled at the Linton Travel Tavern, didn't he? And Sue Cook, the TV veteran.
So this is the famous Jed Maxwell episode, isn't it? Where Alan.
Your favourite episode is this?
No, it's certainly up there.
Sorry, Valentine's Day.
I'd say the Valentine's Day episode is
probably
my favourite episode, and we can go on to that one in a minute. Why? But I think this is where we're coming into the battle of Series 1 versus Series 2. I think
it's a good debate.
So I probably got into Series 2. I don't know first. I think it just came on probably on UK TV Gold or something like that at the time, and that's how
it might have been on the BBC at the time.
It could have been, yeah, but I can't remember how old I was when I got into Partridge.
Series 2, you said?
Yeah, I got into Series
2002, so you would have been 13.
Possible.
Yeah.
So I got into that one first, but I think more recent years I've veered more towards Series 1. I think that's probably because the Jed Maxwell episode's in there. The Valentine's Day episode.
You know you're wrong, don't you? Series 2 is the better series. I don't know whether you have a favourite, Philip.
Still brilliant.
Oh, no. So I started with Series 1, and to be honest, they're so close in terms of quality.
When it was on the telly?
No, I think it was after. I think...
on UK Gold, like Drake.
Yeah, I think it was... in all, I think it was one of my best friends who introduced me to it. I don't think I saw it on the telly at the time, but for me, it's season 1. Nowly,
that's interesting. Yeah,
I just the premise of season 1 where he's stuck in the Linton Travel Tavern,
like the pathos, the crashing, the failure of this TV star who shot a man on his show and now he's living in a hotel. His wife's left him for a fitness instructor.
Exactly.
He drinks that yellow stuff in tins. The idiot.
It's just the thing about season 1 as well is that obviously they're all kind of standalone episodes, but if you notice there is a theme where he's essentially starting to kind of lose his mind.
Yeah, absolutely.
Obviously there is a narrative there, and there's a narrative about him being stuck in that travel tavern for how many days? I can't remember.
There's this kind of formulaic thing with comedy. A lot of comedians, you'll see it in Blackadder use, where if you look at, say, something like Blackadder, where the first series doesn't really work, and there's this thing about you take big characters and you put them in a really tight, close space and just watch chaos happen. So in Blackadder, they moved from the big open scenery into a studio. In Partridge, it's moving from a studio into, like you say, the hotel room or a caravan. In Series 2. So you put these big characters in this in closed space and just watch them basically make a mess of it. And that is why I think why Partridge works so well. And that is kind of a formulaic way of writing that a lot of comedians use. If you think like Fawlty Towers is set in the enclosure of a hotel, Only Fools and Horses, you will have stuff, but it comes back to the flat or the pub, so there is that kind of formulaic way of writing in Partridge, but it just implodes with a character. You can't totally destroy the character, but they're down on their luck. It's that self-deprecating thing again. You see it with Alan, particularly, and I think for you, I think with you, Phil, I think coming back to it, Series 1 has become my favourite.
Interesting.
You've got the Farmers episode, which you've touched upon. You've got the Jed Maxwell episode, which will come back. I know you had a question about the event, which probably has one of my favourite Partridge lines of all time, which with the Sue Cook, which you're going to come back on. That Valentine's Day episode is incredible.
Yeah,
I think if you're going to watch anyone, it's that one. If you think that Valentine's Day episode has the chocolate oranges line, where he's been informed that he's can no longer, he's going to be declared bankrupt, isn't he, I believe, if he doesn't scale back Pear Tree Productions.
Yep.
Again, typical Alan, won't just get a BBC contract, had to set up his own production company and do it his own way. That's very Alan in itself. But Lynn is informing him. You may have this clipped up, Greg, I don't know.
I have.
Yeah, so
do you want to have a listen?
To start this episode, I'll play it to lead you into it.
You lead us in.
As Lynn is discussing with Alan the nature of the financial situation and how he can save Pear Tree Productions if he scales the company back to 2 with a plan to rebuild. But typically Alan, again, probably a bit like where he's got to keep on this fake persona, so he would rather not keep his business but dissolve the company instead of not driving a Mini Metro. He would rather drive a Rover 200, which is an equally as poor car, but in Alan's eyes, as long as it's got his walnut gear knob, it's okay. But I'll let you carry on.
Do you want to hear the good news or the bad news?
The good news?
Well, Rawlinsons have said you can have another 50 of the shop soil chocolate oranges if you plug them again tomorrow.
Excellent. And the bad news?
The accountants say that since you've definitely not got a second series from the BBC, you're going to have to sack everyone at Pear Tree Productions and close the office down. Otherwise, they're going to declare you bankrupt on Friday.
Still, good news about the chocolate oranges.
And the joke of it is, he does sack everybody at Pear Tree, and the way it's done as well is appalling.
Again, why it's my favourite episode, because he goes in. he can't just face the music and say, sorry, everyone, we're closing the company. Alan tells them that he can't back down. So he says, got a second series, you're all on board, doesn't he? Just, then he just sack someone for leaving a discarded coffee cup.
And an uncleansed coffee cup, yeah. I will not have uncleansed coffee cups in Pear Tree Production. Who left this coffee cup here? Yeah, you're sacked.
Yeah, because he didn't even quote the plague was started by a malattended surface or something like that. And then moves on to somebody rolling or tutting their eyes as being an excuse to sack someone. What are you doing, Alan?
What was the name of the woman again?
Alison,
you're a lady. I don't want this to be unpleasant. Are you sacking me as well? Oh, yes, I am.
You're rotten shit. Get your coat.
You're rotten shit too. Get your coat.
So even the nature of how he can't handle himself as a boss, and it just shows that he's just so inept in that, and the way he can't talk to people, to the point where he locks them in the boardroom. Apart from Jill, who's gone out to get supplies, which brings the next episode perfectly onto the next part.
And of course, when Jill comes back and asks where everybody is, he says they've all gone down to Longstanton Spice Museum.
But you can't celebrate with the Spice Girls, so why not go down to Longstanton Spice Museum? But it's the way he even cuts in on the intercom and says, didn't have the guts to tell you, haven't got a second series, but you can all exit by the fire escape. Doesn't he? Start the car in, isn't it? All that
and of course, that then leads us on to Alan and Jill going out. I'm Batman, one of the best. I know it was one of your favourite quotes.
Brilliant line.
And the lion bar.
But even Alan talking to women, isn't it? A woman he so clearly fancies, but he's hiding behind a crack in the door, isn't he? He can't even just ask her outright. He's hiding behind a crack in the door, and even to the point he goes quickly when he wants her answer, and then immediately as soon as she's given the answer he wants, he opens the doors. I'm Batman.
It's just the way he just strides in, knocks the door, and just I'm Batman. It's just incredible.
And then he says, "What do you want to do?" And of course she says, "Norwich is our oyster." And she says, "Well, we could go shopping," because he says, "I know." A cracking owl sanctuary. Unless you can think of anything better. But we could go shopping. And then it just cuts to the shot of the owl.
And it cuts to the owl and all the hawks and things in the background, doesn't it? It's just fantastic.
And then he said, I like the AstroTurf, death by firing squad, like the most humane way to execute a bird of prey. And Jill's just sort of going along with it. And then, of course, it comes back to the hotel later, doesn't it?
Well, there's an even better bit in between that. When they're driving. They're driving. And Alan, again, in his ineptitude, is trying to be clever. Put a song on and says, listen to this, Lily, it'll blow your socks off. But then plays... Jill says, and then plays Gaudete, which is famously a Christmas song. But Alan's so inept with that he somehow gets that wrong as well.
And then it gets back to the hotel. He tries to do Why Do Birds Suddenly Appear? Yeah. Why do birds? But no, that's too loud. That's too high.
You get the general idea,
And then, of course, it gets back to Alan's room, and we all remember what happened there.
I don't know, got no idea.
Jill, what are you doing? For God's sake, Jill, what are you doing? Jill, God's sake.
I just thought I'd pour chocolate mousse over you.
You've got it on the bed sheets, you've got it on the dressing gown, you've got it on the valance.
On the what?
The skirt thing round the side of the bed.
I thought it'd be erotic.
Oh, Jill, mousse from a bowl is very nice, but to put it on a person is demented.
It's only a bit of chocolate.
It may be chocolate to you, Jill, but to an unwitting member of staff, this could look like some sort of dirty protest against the standard of service in the hotel, which I happen to think is very good. I mean, it's not 5-star, but it's certainly competitive. Oh, God. Yes?
Is everything all right, Mr. Partridge? Heard a bit of commotion.
No, it's fine.
Oh, right. Do you know you've got chocolate in your face?
Yeah, I've just been eating some mousse.
The outtakes for that. Have you seen the outtakes for that on
YouTube?
No.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, Coogan and I can't remember the name of the actor who plays Michael now.
Neither can I, actually.
But the way they're just laughing at you, you've got chocolate on your face. Yeah, I've just been eating some mousse.
They just can't keep a straight face while they're doing it, can they?
I think what's fascinating about that scene is how sheltered Alan is.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because that is one of the big themes of obviously all of the shows.
The scene with Jill, chocolate mousse.
Yeah, but
the whole build-up.
Just
traders need access to Dixon's.
And he's just it's when he's talking about the mousse, he's like, mousse is lovely in a bowl, and like there's no other use for mousse. It's just he's so sheltered.
There's no other use for mousse. That's a good line in itself.
And even the constant going on about the pedestrianisation of Norwich city centre, even in those circumstances. just fixated on such random issues, isn't it?
I'm still laughing about the use for mousse. Sounds like an advert, doesn't it? But yeah, Do you feel sorry for him, though, in a way?
I think there's an element you do.
But in real life, you probably wouldn't, would you?
I don't know. Like,
or would you?
It doesn't come down to context like any comedy, really.
Probably.
You wouldn't want to know an Alan, like you said, really, but you feel sorry for him because it's a fictional character.
You'd want to know an Alan to have a good laugh at them, take the mickey out of them, wouldn't you? It's funny as well, like, a bit going back to what you said before, Drake. American comedy tends to big up the star, doesn't it? Whereas here,
it's brash and it's outlandish. Whereas
we just got to break them down, like you said.
Yeah, it has to be self-deprecating. There's kind of a rule, isn't it, that you have to laugh at yourself before you can laugh at somebody else, which is a healthy rule.
Yeah, but so many people can't, can they?
No, it is.
Well, it's a joke, really. People are trying to take the fun out of life, aren't they? I think. Other situations he gets himself into. Let's quickly go back to series 1. Something we touched on before.
Hello? Well, right. Well, where are you? What? Oh, come on. Oh, well, this is... Oh, that's bang out of order. Well, take a look in the mirror. What, pardon? No, I've got a better idea. Why don't you shove it up your arse? Sue Cook's pulled out.
I wonder what Sue Cook thinks about that scene, because she must have seen it. You know, Gary Wilmot and all the other people he mentions, Jonathan Ross.
Yeah.
I think, you know, only in I'm Alan Partridge you can have a character who used to have a TV show and then replicates that in Linton Travel Tavern with an audience of about 20 people.
True.
And when he's describing it to the Irish producers and they're like, oh, sorry, it's to Jed, isn't it? It's to Jed Maxwell. He's describing the show and he's like, what's it all about, Alan? Yeah. And Alan just goes, well, it's my TV show. Here, basically,
just replicate the same thing. Yeah.
Actually, Jed Maxwell. That obviously this was the lunatic, the mentalist, as Alan called him. I think he called him a few other things as well, didn't he? But we'll just stick to mentalist for now. And of course, he traps him in his house, doesn't he? But he also takes the Irish back with him, pretending it's Alan's house. Another hole Alan gets himself into.
Again, rather than Alan say, because he doesn't want to admit he's living in the Travel Tavern, doesn't he? And again, he hasn't planned it. He hasn't planned a space to be interviewed or anything. So,
because I'm trying to remember, the Irish guys, what were they over for? Were they pitching something to him?
He was going to do a film for them, wasn't he?
Right.
A piece about for the Irish tourist board, wasn't it?
That was it. That was it. A bit like he did Hamilton's Water Breaks.
Yeah. So, and then
opening a new Texas home care. If any of you are going to be down there. Sorry.
Yeah. So he, rather than that, then he gets into a mess with Jed Maxwell, who decides to pretend he's living with Jed, doesn't he? So then he show him his house, but then it backfires totally, doesn't it? As Jed turns out to be an absolute deranged fan, doesn't he?
That's one way of putting it.
But if you think as well, even before that bit, when the whole mess he's got into is because he's at the hotel and they're having breakfast and they're like, oh, it's so soulless and sterile in this hotel, and he's like, oh yeah, I agree, because he can't say, he can't admit that he's staying there, so he goes along with it.
Oh yeah, because he goes tea or coffee, tea or coffee,
and then he's like, thanks for this, you robot.
Yeah,
it's just incredible.
Brilliant. But I think the Jed Maxwell character comes from a Stuart Lee thing again, doesn't it? So there's an interview somewhere, it might be with the Oxford, it might not be Oxford Student Union, it might be the Oxford Brookes University, but I heard Stuart Lee talk about it before. And I think Stuart Lee was doing a gig, and I think his hotel was messed up or something along those lines, I believe. And so he didn't have anywhere to stay. And some of the fans went, just stay at our place. So Stuart Lee tells his story. He goes back to these fans' place, and he's suddenly lying there realising there's like posters everywhere of himself on the walls. So he goes, like, it wasn't quite as bad as Jed Maxwell. He managed to stay the night on the sofa and leave, not running out and speeding off in the Rover.
It wasn't put in a headlock.
In a headlock, yeah.
I can't breathe. I'm going to see my brother in Leeds.
But I believe, again, that's come from a Stuart Lee bit. Then I think he even probably rang Armando Iannucci in the morning and said, this has happened to me. And that, again, that's a formation going back to these great writers that are on that show where, again, there's some truth in that character, but, turned up to 11, as it were, for Jed Maxwell.
Isn't it funny, though, how almost all the best comedy, not all of it, but almost all the best comedy is just based on people's real life experience.
I think it has to be. It has to be based in some truth.
All the Peter Kay stuff.
Yeah, it has to be based
all he's doing, really, I'm not taking anything away, he's brilliant, but he's just recalling moments from the past, isn't he?
Yeah, and very quickly, I think the Peter Kay thing's, incredible. I'm obviously from the north.
Yes.
And all of the stuff he says, that's exactly what it's like. I mean, with my family, big light on, garlic bread, all of that is
the
real.
Big light is true.
Yeah,
we put the big light on.
We even use that phrase in the Midlands. It's a Midlands phrase, not a big light, isn't it? Yeah.
So, but it's so true, isn't it? I know, but it's just... it just resonates with all of us, I think, doesn't it?
I think all art has to be relatable on some level. Even music, you often hear the term like a band's first album because you can relate to it. By the time they're millionaires and the time's gone on, their music and their art isn't as relatable because they're not living that same lifestyle that we can all relate to as fans, I suppose.
But you know, some of the sitcoms that used to run in the 90s, that, you know, family-friendly, like Only Fools or Keeping Up Appearances, One Foot in the Grave, that's a bit more surreal, isn't it?
They're almost cartoon characters, like... Alan is like a cartoon character, but there is still an element of truth in him.
Yeah, because some of the situations that, say, Victor Meldrew gets himself into, it's hilarious, but it's not that realistic, really. Or Hyacinth Bouquet or whatever.
Not, is it?
But the premise of the characters is brilliant, but they're quite unrealistic scenarios, aren't they?
There's probably an element of truth in Hyacinth. There's an element of trying to be keeping up with the Joneses, that you know, one-upmanship.
Having ideas above your station.
Even the changing the name from Bucket to Bouquet, isn't it? You know? So there is an element of truth. There is an element of truth in all these characters, but obviously they are kind of cartoon versions of real life, aren't they?
We've got a few more Alan moments to play in, but I'm going to save a few because we're going to do another show as well, as we said, for the Christmas special. But here is one I think we should play in, and this this is Alan trying to get into the country club choristers.
Brilliant.
And they'd been opening the door for him, hadn't they? No matter what he said on the intercom, they'd let him in. But this time it backfired, so he tries to find his own way in.
Alan, what are you doing?
Climbing over a fence.
Oh, you should watch yourself. You're nearly fit.
You're going to say I was nearly 50 then? Might be nearly 50 then, but at least I can make...
What?
Lynn, I've pierced my foot on a spike. It bloody freaking hurts like...
Can you get yourself in the recovery position?
You're just quoting bits of casualty now.
Well, you don't fall at once.
Then all the blood will run out the hole in my foot, you old mess.
Pull your foot off now.
What, I'll leave it on the spike?
Pull it off the spike. After 3.
No, I'm not going to do it, Lynn. You pull your foot off.
Well, mine's not on the spike.
There's someone coming. Be normal. Be normal. Hello, Dante Fires just through that. Oh, you're going to have a good time. Just being a bit... I can feel the blood squelching in my shoe. Can you hear it squelching?
Yeah.
Listen.
Oh, look at you, Alan. You should be in hospital.
Lynn, some of these people have come from Stoke. Very well.
Shall I go on for you?
Lynn, you couldn't present a cat.
Even there, Lynn is trying her very best to help him, and he's still being nasty to her.
Absolutely, yeah.
And as well, you know, he's got his foot on a spike, and he's like, "Be normal."
Why would you need to be normal?
You don't need to be normal.
No.
And anyone else would be going off in an ambulance at this point, but Alan's still going to bludgeon through and do the Dante's Fires presentation. And you'll get your fun packs.
But he made a Pink Floyd concert for under £500.
Yes, he did. Puff flash, bang. There's some more glitter. Our favourite Partridge moments, just before we sign off in this show, and thanks both for today. This has been great. It's just been a laugh, hasn't it, talking about Alan? Some of them we've played in already. What for you, Sue Cook? I think it is for you.
Sue Cook will be my favourite one, standout one, and it's a great episode because it features in the Jed Maxwell episode. I think it's probably up there for you, Phil, as well. Yeah. There's several bits in that Valentine's Day episode which is absolutely fantastic. Definitely check out Knowing Me, Knowing You, the radio. Absolutely. It's probably available on YouTube somewhere, isn't it? That's probably what such an underrated piece of Partridge work, isn't it? There?
Yeah, and it's only is it half an hour, 40 minutes long? It's not too long to listen to either. I find the spike funny as well, Phil. Not just the way he says, "I've stepped on the bloody spike," or whatever you'd say if you really did it. I've pierced my foot on a spike. It's the way he comes out with these things. Any highlights for you, Phil?
Oh, there's so many.
There are so many.
I could go on for hours.
So many quotes.
I think that's the thing. The show, really, every single episode, there's moments where you could say, actually, that's my favourite. And I can't think of many other shows which are like that, to be honest. I think for me, one of my favourites would be Bill Carr from 10 King Road.
Yes.
You know,
actually, we've got that. We could have a listen in if you want before we go. And we do,
that's brilliant.
Without going too much into
now
it
you've
now,
mentioned it, we might have to have a listen into that.
The traffic cone, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Should we have a listen in? Because it all started with Alan and Michael. Well, in fact, let's just listen. Let's just listen.
You must have got up to a few pranks in your time.
Why, I mind this one time, right? I was stationed out in Belize, right? And I had this little macaque monkey as a pet, right? And one day, I came back to my tent, right? And it had eaten all me fags. So I picked it up and I threw it in the sea.
In the sea.
Well, he'd eaten all me fags, man, you know. It was a big packet of 200 duty-frees, like.
You threw a monkey in the sea? That's awful. I mean, I was fishing for some sort of funny story. That's just upsetting.
Well, you know, I wasn't thinking straight, right? You know, I just kind of got the red mist in front of my eyes. I just grabbed the monkey and hid it in the sea.
Stop saying you threw your monkey in the sea. All I can see is a monkey spinning towards the water.
Well, it didn't go straight in the water. It bounced off a rock.
Oh, my... That's such a pointless death. At least when they experiment on them, they sort of get something out of it. Nice perfume or something.
You know, I've often wondered, right, why is it that they put the perfume in the monkey's eyes, right? Why not just put it on its wrist, like, you know, posh ladies in department stores?
It's just cruel, isn't it? I mean, mind you, if you've been to Knowsley Safari Park and they're pulling the wipers off your windscreen and nicking your hubcaps, you lose sympathy.
Right. I tell you what, maybe the monkeys is trying to collect enough parts together to make a complete car, right? And then all just pile in it and break through the gates and escape.
It's a frightening thought.
Right? Is this making you feel any better?
Not really, no. You know, you've done some crazy things in your life. I wish I'd been a bit more spontaneous. You know. Sometimes I feel like just going out and, I don't know, stealing a traffic cone and putting it on my head and saying, "Look at me, I'm a giant witch."
I just did then, you know, go and steal a cone, man.
No, I can't. It's outrageous.
I'll come with you.
Right, there we go.
Threw a monkey in the sea. What a lie.
So what? I'm glad we've actually put this clip on, because something we've kind of talked about a little bit, but I think it's worth saying is, I think the reason why Alan Partridge is so successful, obviously it's about Steve Coogan, it's obviously about the character, but there's incredible support characters.
Yeah,
you know,
yes.
Michael, Lynn, Sonia, all of these support characters are so good, and I think that this clip really highlights, you know, Michael is it's funny because almost Michael's a more like surreal version, like you know, and what's interesting there in that conversation is they're both so factually wrong, but because they're just so oblivious to like the real world, and they play off each other so well, and it's incredible.
It comes into that what you were saying about Alan being so sheltered, the fact he's never done anything slightly controversial. You know, we've all been students and all done daft stuff, and you know, we won't go into all of that.
No, I think you should go into that.
All that, but
I think you should go into that.
He's never stolen a traffic cone, or you know, something as small as that in Alan's world. You know, it's theft. It can't be done. You know, there's no risque element to Alan at all. Is there? There's nothing. He's controversial because he gets his foot in it, but never sees the nicer sides of being controversial, does he? You know, the fun bits of life he misses out on.
But what's hilarious about it is, obviously, it's further on in the episode, is, you know, they go and steal that traffic cone, and it's classic Alan Partridge for the police to stop it.
Absolutely.
Like, how innocuous, how innocent is stealing a traffic cone, and trust Alan to get caught by the police. And then, obviously, his lie, you know, that sequence for me is one of the best bits of Alan
Partridge. And, of course, the funny thing is, they don't even recognise him, do they?
Yes,
they do ask what his name is.
Of course,
We're running out of time in this show, so I think what we'll do is save that bit, because we've got that too, and we will put that in our Christmas special. But yeah, do you know what's funny about Michael as well? Because he's a bit nice, a bit dim, a bit thick, it actually makes Alan look even smarter, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And I guess with Sonia as well, it's a bit like that, isn't it?
Yeah, they're the perfect counterpart to Alan, and I think, you know, part of you thinks, like, if Alan was a real person, is he friends or, you know, with those people, because it makes Alan seem better.
Yeah, because when he meets Dan in the petrol station in series 2, he's quite horrible to Michael then, isn't he?
Yeah.
And he wants to go for a drink with Dan on his own.
Yeah.
And not with Michael.
He kind of immediately discards him. And I think it's interesting because it does show the more callous side of Alan.
Yeah, because if you remember when Alan pierced his foot on the spike and he was on morphine, remember at the end of that episode, it's Michael who's there to help him and get him back into the caravan. Yeah, funny. Okay, well, I think we'll wrap this one up, and we will definitely come to attempted, or what could be perceived as attempted, traffic cone theft in the Christmas special. For now, gentlemen, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
It has been an absolute pleasure. I don't know whether we should just listen one more time to this before we go.
No, I've got a better idea. Why don't you shove it up your arse?
I love the way how he slams down the phone as well. And imagine what Sue must have been saying on the other end. Pardon? Oh, come on.
No, I've got a better idea. Why don't you shove it up your arse?
Okay, well, we will be back for a Christmas special. We'll get those mince pies in, as we say. But for now, gentlemen, thank you very much indeed. You've been listening to Talking Away about Alan Partridge. Mandrake, Phil, thanks very much. We'll be back at Christmas.